This video is brought to you by our amazing supporters over at Patreon.
So far, we've found a satisfactory definition for systems, or at least what they do in games. But every game uses systems to some extent, so how do we define systemic games? A systemic game is a game with one or more in-world systems, where the player is consistently encouraged to interact with those systems in order to win. There's a lot to digest here, so let's break it down into parts. Let's start with in-world systems. This ties back to our last video, where we're separating in-world systems like physics, chemistry, weather, economics, and line of sight, things that exist within the fiction of our game, from systems that are part of the software of our game, things like player input, UI, and saving and loading. If you haven't seen part 2 of this series and want more definition on the effect of in-game systems, I'd recommend you give that video a watch. Next comes this idea of interacting with systems. Many games still have in-game systems, like gravity or physics, but the player has no influence over these systems, or they cannot interact with them beyond being affected by them. Most physics systems work this way. They keep you from clipping through walls and pull you down toward the ground, but you can't affect them or really use them. This doesn't mean you have control over the system, but that you can interact with it in a meaningful way in the course of playing the game. In a basic platformer, gravity pulls you downward, but you don't have any means to take advantage of this beyond moving your character. Systemic games give players access to these systems, either directly or indirectly. Simulation and strategy games give you the ability to impact systems on a macro scale, directing large groups of units or defining areas of the world. Adventure and stealth games give the player control on a more micro level. You may utilize systems like flammability or physics to solve puzzles, or impact patrol schedules to avoid detection. Which brings us to the idea of winning through these system interactions. In a systemic game, by default, the systems in the world will likely prevent you from winning the game, or at least they don't make winning any easier. The player must interact with these systems to either make success possible, or make it a little more achievable. In a game like SimCity, the systems run from the start, but with no construction and no population, your city and your funds won't grow. It's only by setting these systems in motion that the player progresses towards success. Similarly, in a stealth game, the guard's patrols make it difficult or impossible to reach your objective. You need to observe these patterns and make use of gaps in coverage, or even distract guards to make your own gaps that you can use. In systemic games, the design often demands that we interact with these systems in order to progress. The last factor is encouraging the player to use these systems. I struggled with this section, debating between saying the player can or must interact with these systems, but neither of these felt quite right. One example that came to mind was Hitman. Hitman presents you with a scenario where you must assassinate a target. You can burst in, guns blazing, and just make a beeline for the target, ignoring all the systems in place. You don't have to use these systems necessarily. But the game encourages you to do so. It's the preferred way to play the game. They do this by putting stealth tools at your disposal, and by giving you a better mission rating for remaining undercover. It's not just that you can use the systems. The game's design guides you toward using them. When these factors all come together, a game can be defined as a systemic game. There may be some exceptions, but this is a good initial set of criteria to identify a systemic game. However, for a systemic game to be good, the systems must be good. In the next couple of videos, we'll discuss the elements of a good system and what types of games lend themselves to systemic design. Until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.